This is the Sixth Man Show, an Orlando Magic podcast, with your hosts, Kevin Tucker and Jonathan Osborne, covering all things Magic basketball. By fans, for fans. Go Magic!
What's going on, Orlando Magic fans? You guys are back with the Sixth Man Show. Today is Thursday, September 19th, 2024. I'm Kevin. I'm here flying solo today. Jonathan's on vacation. We're actually recording this a little early. I'm recording this on Monday night. Normally we record on Wednesday night, but if you've been following the show for any amount of time, you know this Wednesday, well, yesterday by the time you're listening to it, the 18th is the day of my big heart surgery. So wanted to get this recorded ahead of time. That way you guys have an episode on Thursday. You guys know we're consistent. We always want to put out those episodes Mondays and Thursdays. And so I'm recording this Monday night. If you're curious about how the surgery went, I'm sure Jonathan hopefully by now has updated on our social media channels how the surgery went. And so definitely if you're curious, check that out over on Twitter and Instagram, those kinds of things. But anyway, yeah, glad you're here. Thanks for hanging out with us today. It's going to be a fun show. We're continuing our Eastern Conference preview series. Today we've got Ti Windisch, who covers the Milwaukee Bucks for the Gyro Step Podcast, a fellow Blue Wire podcast as well. Ti's awesome. We've known Ti for several years now, and so definitely excited to get to talk about the very interesting Milwaukee Bucks here later in the show. The addition of Damian Lillard, the firing of Adrian Griffin, the hiring of Doc Rivers, and what all of that means for this past season and this upcoming season as well. Definitely thanks to Ti for joining the show, and definitely check that out later on in the episode. But first, we are truly in the dog days of summer, folks. As I sit here and record this Monday night, September 16th, no major news since we last spoke on Monday's show with Brandon Kravitz. But instead of real Magic news, there were some strange conversations happening on the internet, and I want to share them with you. Our friends over at Numbers on the Board, amazing YouTube channel, basketball content. They got a show on ESPN, all that kind of stuff. They put out a poll on their YouTube community page. And the poll was asking, which iteration of the Orlando Magic logo do you prefer? And if you're a Magic fan, you know there have been 3 generations of Magic logos. The original one, which actually my hat has it. I've got it a couple other places behind me. You have the second one, which was kind of like the 2000s-ish era with, you know, the Magic word and the new Magic ball. And there's obviously the newest iteration that's been around. It's basically since the 2010s. And so they put this poll up there. And again, mind you, this is a national basketball coverage site, right? This is not Magic fans. But what really surprised me was the result of the poll. And I'm going to put it up right now. Shows that middle generation of Magic logo, 2001 to 2010, got 78% of the vote. 78% of the votes picked that middle iteration, which stunned me, okay? I personally believe that our newest one, our current one, is the worst of the 3, so no surprise that was at 10%. But the fact that the OG, the original Orlando Magic logo, which I feel like a lot of Magic fans actually prefer it more than the second generation one, that it lost in a landslide. 12% of the vote going to the original, the OG Orlando Magic logo. Again, 12% to the OG, 78% to the second generation, and 10% to the current iteration. That shocked me. I'm curious if that shocked you. And really, I kind of want to hear your thoughts on this. So reply, to us on Twitter. Put a comment here on YouTube. Let us know on Instagram, however you want to do it. What is your favorite iteration of the Orlando Magic logo? Because I was shocked that 78% of people put the second generation as their favorite logo. Very surprised. We talked about it a little bit in our Discord with our patrons. A couple people shared the same way. We did someone did a poll on there as well. Who put that poll up there? Let me see. Steve Long put that poll up there, and it was split 50-50 between A and B, the first generation, the second generation. That maybe feels a little more in line with how I feel. I do prefer the OG more than the second generation, but 78-12, that blew me away. So definitely let us know in the comments. Let us know in the YouTube comments, and let us know on Twitter as well what you think is your favorite iteration of the Orlando Magic logo. All right, folks. Again, not a whole lot of Orlando Magic news in the world right now, so we're going to go ahead and get into our interview, our conversation with Ti Windisch, who again covers the Milwaukee Bucks, as we continue our Eastern Conference preview series. And now, Orlando Magic fans, as we continue our Eastern Conference preview series, we go way, way up north to the Milwaukee Bucks. I'm joined now by a very special guest, Ti Windisch, who host the Gyro Step Podcast covering the Milwaukee Bucks, which also is a fellow Blue Wire podcast, by the way. Shout out. But yeah, Ti, thanks for joining the show today. Thanks for coming to the Orlando Magic side of the internet for a little bit to talk about the Bucks. How you been doing, man?
I've been doing well. It's like season preview mode, and we don't do a good one on the Gyro Step, but luckily that's okay because I'm lucky enough to be able to do a lot of these. So I'm thinking about the Pacers, the Cavs, and now the Magic. So props to you guys, because usually it's just the in division. This is, all the way out in the Southeastern Division, way down by Orlando, the team that, frankly, I kind of wish the Bucks had drawn in the first round. I don't know if their result is different. I think it maybe looks a little better, though, given who they had and didn't have. But it was exciting to watch Orlando last season kind of take that step, and excited to talk about just basketball with you as we're like a month or change away from the season here.
I know, it's super exciting. I think for the Magic, we're under 2 weeks when this episode goes out. We're under 2 weeks away from media day and training camp and all that kind of stuff, which is definitely super exciting. And yeah, this is our first time doing these preview stuff, by the way. The show's been around for 5 years. Jonathan, started back in 2019. We've never done these kind of previews. And so we're not doing the whole Eastern Conference. We're not going to preview the Pistons or whatever. No offense, to the Wizards or that kind of stuff. But we've said we're going to kind of preview the teams that are kind of in that, the playoff realm there, as the Magic, found themselves last season. Before we talk about the current iteration of the Bucks, Ti, I want to go back. I want to go back to a very special time, I'm sure, for you and all Bucks fans, because you guys got to experience something in 2021 that, all Magic fans haven't gotten to experience, right? But especially you guys, this was your first championship in the modern era, right? I think I saw it was back in 71 when the Bucks last won a championship. Of course, I'm referring to the 2021 NBA championship, which Magic fans, like I said, still haven't gotten to experience. But as a fellow, quote unquote, small market, I was rooting for you guys. And so for you guys to do that. So for all Magic fans that are listening to this right now, tell us about that experience. And ultimately, we just want to know, is it all worth it? Is all the pain and the suffering worth it for that championship?
100%. Yeah, it is. And I think to me at least, and maybe I can say this because I don't root for any teams that are like winning them every couple of years. I don't know what that's like. I feel like it makes it seem so much more. I think the one Bucks title, and I'm not here to say which one is better, which one is worth more. I don't care about that stuff. If you root for the team, theirs is worth more no matter what. But knowing all the close calls and all the not close calls, right? I mean, I think Orlando can resonate, right? Like there was like decades for the Bucks, a couple of them where they were just never really all that close. From 2001, basically until they had Giannis, they were never close. Like there was not a year when you were like, maybe Brandon Jennings and Monta Ellis can beat LeBron, and no, they can't. They can't win a game, in fact, despite what Brandon Jennings called before the series. So, yeah, it was incredible. And I just remember one of the first things I thought, and I think this is maybe one of the most special ones. You're celebrating with other fans. That stuff is great. Thinking about what it means for the players. And, if you follow a team closely, you'll see all the positive and all the negative said about each player, all the hard things they have to go through on the court, off the court to a certain extent. And just knowing for us, I think Giannis had gotten the respect he deserved. There's always people who dislike Giannis, but the basketball zeitgeist is like, yeah, Giannis is awesome. So that's great. But it was awesome. He won one. But for me, it was Chris Middleton. Chris Middleton, I've seen go through so much, seen all the detractors, everything else, even within Bucks fans. And to see Chris be the guy who was like the half-court engine to them winning a title and all these clutch games, couple huge ones against the Suns. I just remember like they can never take that away, right? Like that's always going to be something that they have. And I think with Giannis and the rest of the guys too, and Bud, another kind of controversial lightning rod figure, for Bud to get one, and we'll see how things go in Phoenix. Maybe he gets another one, maybe not. It was just such a cool thing to watch all of those people experience the mountaintop, and then to be able to celebrate it with all of our podcasters, friends, everything. I got to go to the parade, which I would very much recommend. I didn't even get to like fully enjoy the parade, if you know what I mean. Yeah. I drove back after, but still had a good time. And actually, that was the first time I met my podcast partner, Rohan. So would also recommend that. We kind of, stumbled into each other there and did a live pod outside of Fiserv Forum where the Bucks play. But it's all great. And I would say, gobble up as much as you can. I mean, I still have this is not planned. But I have this around. What I say is, if they ever get another one, I'll drink this one and replace it with one. This is for the audio listeners. 2021 Bucks champions wine. I think it just says red wine. Do they not say What I don't know what kind of red wine. I'm sure it'll taste good to me. But we got that's the only wine I'm patient enough to save. So I tried to really just like, I don't usually go for like commemorative stuff, but I was like, I gotta really enjoy this one because it might be another 50 years. It was 50 years, so you don't know how long it's going to be till the next one.
Right. Yeah. You got to get at least something commemorative for something like that. Yeah. That's super cool. That's an amazing thing. And like I said, Magic fans are just longing for that. You know, we'll see if maybe we can,
some close ones, some close calls, but yeah.
Yeah. So I hate to, knock it down a few pegs. Yeah, that was the mountaintop, but I want to talk to you about this past season. And Ty, for me, and I think probably for a lot of the NBA, this isn't groundbreaking what I'm about to say, but the Bucks to me were one of the most interesting storylines of the season, right? Obviously, last offseason, you acquired Damian Lillard, which is a huge deal. You get him, you think you pair him up with Giannis. That's amazing. Hire Adrian Griffin, a first-year head coach for you guys, starting this past season. Then you go 30-13, one of the best records in the East, although maybe wasn't all perfect through those 43 games, but nevertheless, you end up 30-13. Adrian Griffin is gone. Eventually, they hire Doc Rivers, and I'm going to ask you a little bit more specifically about the coaching change in a little bit. But after the Doc Rivers, hire, you go 17-19 the rest of the regular season, face off with the Pacers in the first round, and lose in 6 games. So coaching stuff aside, which again, I'll ask you more about that in a little bit. What was just the roller coaster ride like for Bucks fans over the course of this long season and then into the postseason last year?
It was a difficult one because I think Bucks fans and like myself as a Bucks watcher, not used to the amount of struggling they had to do throughout the whole regular season, and not just injury. Even when they were kind of healthy, like when they were mostly healthy, they were actually pretty damn good. I mean, they had like I think they had the best 4-man lineup to play X minutes in the league, and one of the best starting lineups. So for the most part, when their primary players were out there, at least the parts of the games where they were all out there together, they were pretty good. Dame's season was uneven. I think that's where to start. He had the game winner opening night against Philly, which was great, and then did a Dame time walk-off against Sacramento much later in the season. But the efficiency never really got there, and you could see the cohesiveness with Giannis was very much in progress, and they probably didn't go to it enough early on in the season. And then I think it was just there was always something that just wasn't right. Early on, the defensive scheme they tried for like the first 5 games, they were using Brook way out of the paint, trying to play like Nick Nurse team does. And honestly, Brook didn't hold up the worst, but the team behind him couldn't protect the rim at all. And they were the worst team in the league in allowing shots at the rim, which is just the opposite of what the Bucks have done. And I think the players basically were like, we can't do this anymore. So they switched back to their more base defense, but then the offense isn't totally clicking. And then, now Chris Middleton is ramping up, and then he gets hurt, and then Dame misses some time. And then later in the season, Giannis misses the rest of the season, which is obviously going to be the death knell to any Bucks year, unfortunately. But I think it was really just the roller coaster was the right way to put it. It's like nothing was ever stable, because they didn't come in with a base like they did the last 2 years. And even when they added Drew, things hadn't changed as much. That's a big change, but I think Bledsoe to Drew Holiday was kind of a natural progression, like a Pokemon evolution, right? Like it made logical sense. Drew's way better, but they're kind of similar players. They're gonna like share the load with Chris and Giannis. Dame is a whole different beast. So you're adding that in. You're adding a new 2-guard with Grayson Allen going out in that deal. Malik Beasley, who they got to play next to Drew, makes a lot more sense playing next to Drew than he made next to Dame, but that's all they had to do. They got rookies playing because there's just no athleticism, some role player injuries. Pat Connaughton declined a little bit. So there was just really so many conflating things going on that I think they never built any sort of continuity or any kind of comfortability as a team for the first time in a long time. They were very stable under Bud, for good and for bad, but you knew what to expect. They knew how to play. They'd add new wrinkles, but their base was there. I don't think their base was ever set enough. So I think that in itself, it's really hard to win a lot of games and make a deep playoff run doing that. And maybe they would have had a deeper playoff run. But I think they preached continuity this offseason and heading into it for a good reason. They made some moves we'll talk about. They didn't trade any of those guys. Like I think Pat Connaughton and Bobby Portis, a lot of fans, myself, kind of wanted some moves there. I think the Bucks were very much like, we can evaluate that in February. Like we don't want to make a trade the week before training camp this year, actually. We would love to be able to build something a little more sustainable. So I think they're kind of trying to rebound from what last year was just a very uneven, hectic, just whole run of a regular season.
The Six Man Show is brought to you by Jam Hot Chicken. Jam Hot Chicken is amazing local chicken shack there in Winter Park, located at 400 West New England Avenue, Suite 13 in Hannibal Square. We're big fans of Jam Hot Chicken because they are big fans of the Orlando Magic. They're big fans of this fan community. They're big fans of the Six Man Show. And so we're super thrilled to be partnering with them once again for this 2024-25 Orlando Magic season. Definitely check them out at Jam Hot Chicken on all social media and visit their website at jamhotchickenfl.com to access the menu, online ordering, and all things Jam Hot. Jam Hot Chicken was ranked number 4 in Yelp's top Florida restaurants of 2023, and it's easy to see why. You know, we're big fans of them. Again, not just because of who they are, but because their food is really stinking good. If this is your first time hearing about Jam Hot, we always got to tell the people, whatever you think your spice tolerance level is, bump it down a notch, all right? If you think you like hot, start with the mild and see how you handle it. If you like mild, hey, there is zero shame in getting no spice at all. I get that from time to time. The food is still amazing. Highly recommend it. Definitely check them out, like I said, at Jam Hot Chicken on all social media. And when you visit Jam Hot Chicken, which you should do, just let them know that the Six Man Show sent you. This episode is also brought to you by Nikki Nunu, Maria, Ty Mr. TV, Magic Player History, and Dylan Holden. Those are 5 of our elite and Hall of Fame tier patrons at patreon.com. What is Patreon? Patreon is where people can support their favorite content creators financially. And so that is what those people do, those 5 and many others of our patrons. They help financially support the show and make all the things possible that we do, from episodes like this to our live post-game shows, to the Six Fan Show after select Orlando Magic games, to our watch parties, which, by the way, stay tuned. Got some watch party news coming soon, of course, as the season is right around the corner. But if you want to join those amazing patrons and many others, visit patreon.com/The6Man-Show to find all our different tiers that we have available for you to financially support the show. Again, big shout out to those 5 and to all of our patrons. Thanks so much for financially supporting the Six Man Show. And now let's get back to our conversation with Ti Windisch. And now I do want to ask you about the coaching change, because lots of drama around that. Again, from someone outside looking in, quite confusing. The 30-13 start apparently not being good enough. Adrian Griffin getting kicked out. And then of all people, it's Doc Rivers who is hired to replace him. As far as you being a guy boots on the ground, what the heck was that about? First off, is there anything behind the scenes that you've heard as to why that happened? Do you know kind of why the Adrian Griffin move happened? And then why Doc Rivers was selected? And how are you feeling going forward, knowing that Doc Rivers is still, head coach there?
Yeah, I think, managing the new Dame Giannis partnership, I think proved to be a little much for Griffin. And I think too, he just didn't he didn't approach the job, I think, the right way tactically. Again, the Brook Lopez thing, that was never going to work. Having the 7-foot behemoth, 260-pound, trying to run and play like Jakob Poeltl or Kawhi or, prime Serge Ibaka or something was just not going to work right for these Bucks. And they didn't know how to play behind him. And they didn't have the defenders. I mean, that's how to be honest. The rest of the starting 5 was Dame, Malik Beasley, and, kind of a limited Chris Middleton. That's not the same personnel that can play a scheme like that. So I think he didn't do a good job managing the personalities. There was the Terry Stotts thing before the season, which there's a lot of excitement. Oh, Dame's old coach. Dame loved Terry Stotts. He's an offense guy. He can do the offense, Griffin can do the defense. And he ends up just kind of quitting, which I think at the time it was whatever, who knows what's behind this. It ended up, I think, being kind of a canary in the coal mine of there were just some things wrong behind the scenes, even though they were winning. And you look at their schedule, the first 43 games were a lot easier for the Bucks, and they weren't winning the way they're used to. And that could sound spoiled, but they're not winning the way they're used to winning. It's we're grinding it out to beat Washington because Tyus Jones is just killing us and we have no answer. Things like that, where it's you have a good record, and they were pretty healthy for that part of the season too. I think Doc takes over, the health goes away, and then suddenly they're really a mess. So not to, say Doc was perfect or anything. I do think he did a better job. And I think the nail in the coffin for me was I thought Griffin was kind of adapting and learning. He improved the defense, things like this. And, there were some promising tactical things at the end of games. They ended up switching this action when they haven't been switching as much. See, that's and we found out at some of those big moments throughout the early part of the season, the players were just freelance because they didn't really believe in the defense that was being called. It's okay, if you got a Dame, Giannis, and Chris and Brooke and these guys, and they're not even listening, you probably do just have to make a move. That's probably untenable for the rest of the season. In the playoffs, that could get really ugly with all the eyes on it. So it's obviously a disaster of a process, and the front office horribly bungled that coaching hire, whatever all went into it. But I think they did about as well as they could. That said, salvaging it with Doc, someone who, for all of the faults, can command a room, no matter who's in it, right? I mean, was coaching Orlando and Boston like legitimately 20 years ago. Like, has been around, has coached a lot of Hall of Famers. And I think that part of the whole Doc experience, for all the warts and annoying things that he says, has actually been really good for the Bucks. I think the guys are bought in, and I think he's kind of a low-hanging fruit coach, right? Like, we're going to just spam Dame Giannis pick and roll. A lot of teams that has led to playoff issues. For the Bucks, maybe that could just be good enough, man. Maybe that and a better defense, which he brought, especially in the playoffs, maybe that'll work. So we'll see what happens this year. I know a lot of people laugh about Doc generally still. I'll say he's done a better job than Griffin, and I think on this kind of a team with all this star power that's, I think Dame has a different kind of superstar energy than a Drew Holiday, or certainly than a Chris Middleton. Like, you need to have that kind of ego, not saying he's an egomaniac or anything, but you need to massage and wrangle egos a little more than I think the Bucks needed in the past. I think Doc's done a pretty good job with that.
I forgot all about the Terry Stotts thing until you just mentioned it. Yeah, that's crazy. It's so good to hear that perspective too, because like I said, guys like me who look on the outside looking in, you just look at the 30,000 foot view and you go 30-13, and then Doc turns around and goes 17-19 and loses, in the first round. But it's good to hear that kind of perspective from you. And obviously the playoffs thing, injuries were a big part of that, obviously. But again, on the surface level, you're like, what in the world? But to hear, that's definitely interesting. So would you say that Adrian, maybe, and I'm kind of summarizing what you just said, one of the things Adrian Griffin struggled with was tactically, right? Like you mentioned. Do you think there was any bit of it that was also superstar driven? Like, do you think Giannis and Dame maybe went to the front office to potentially, try to get Griffin out? Like, did it go that far, or have you heard anything like that?
I don't think they went that far as to like directly asking, but I think it was kind of palpable, and I'd hear rumblings, right? And I'd be like, tell me like a story. People would be like, oh, I'm just hearing things are bad. It's like, oh, that's all I could say. I'm like, well, like, what does that mean? I don't know if to put any stock in that, but the kind of things you just hadn't heard about the Bucks before. And I think there were a couple things like, kind of Bobby Portis was speaking up at a players and coaches meeting, and then like him and Griff had a back and forth, which I was like, Bobby's kind of a yapper. Like, okay, I don't know if that's the end of the world, but I don't think it was like a full blown, like, you need to go, like the famous, LeBron story with Spo in the first year. But I think it was just kind of palpable. And I think the decision was made after a loss in Cleveland where they just got totally shellacked, like uncompetitive 35-point loss, something like that. And I know the new owner, Jimmy Haslam, part owner of, there's like the three-way owner structure, was at that game. And I think the on-court, and I wonder if the off-court as well was a factor, and just like, he kind of sped run like the team tuning out of him a little bit, which I think is kind of where Bud got by the very end. Again, there were injuries in some of those playoff runs, but I think the message wasn't resonating the same. And I think Griffin had gotten there by January, and it was just like, okay, we can keep going here, or, there's a big free agent coach who's won a title, and we can interview Kenny Atkinson on the Warriors. And, we have some options. It's not ideal, but if we want to salvage this and have a head start on next year, we probably have to make the move. That's as far as I know. I mean, no insight, just from like what I've heard, mostly reported. I think that's kind of how it unraveled.
I got you. Yeah, that's definitely super interesting. Ty, we've asked this of all the teams that we've previewed on this show, and I think I probably know the answer that you'll have for this. But the question we've been asking to wrap up our talk about last season, would you say, by your standards and your expectations, did the Bucks underachieve, overachieve, or just right? And there's kind of two ways to think of it, right? Like your preseason expectations, obviously, and then obviously as the season goes on and you factor in things like injuries, maybe those things change. But would you say the Bucks underachieved, overachieved, or maybe sat just right for you?
I'd say underachieved. And I mean, it's hard with like the injury part thrown in, but still, I mean, every team deals with that. And I think at one point during the year, like later on, after kind of they're not going to win 70 games and be this juggernaut right away, had faded. It was like, I still think nobody but Boston should really beat them in the playoffs. And it's kind of a mess right now. I think Boston probably beats them unless Boston doesn't play well or something happens to them. But like, I looked at the other teams, and the Knicks were good and they got deeper, but it's like, there's a world where the Bucks have the best 2 players, or at least 3 of the best, 4 or 5 players in that series, depending on how you want to strike it. And then Philly, I just never believe in, and they've never given me reason to believe in them. The Cavs, like we're a tough matchup for the Bucks this year, but again, like push comes to shove, I think Dame and Giannis just kind of overwhelming. Same like Orlando, same boat. Indiana, same boat. Like you should be able to kind of just, even if it's close, push through with those 2 kind of players on your team. And Miami's always kind of a nightmare, but I'm like, I just don't. They kind of seem like they fizzled out, and then they did. I think Boston would have rolled them. They played Boston very well in the regular season, for whatever that's worth. But I was just like, I could see them losing to Boston. I think they should beat the other teams. I'm glad they pushed Indiana to 6, and competitive games too. And they won game 1, which was great. And maybe if Dame is healthy the whole time, that goes 7, or that's more interesting. But I'm glad that they still looked like, I think, a capable team, even with all the issues they had. But it's still super underachieving, right? I mean, this team, you can't have Giannis in his prime and go out in the first round 2 years in a row and feel anything kind of but disgust, I think. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, that's like I said, I figured that would be your answer. That makes a lot of sense. All right, let's fast forward now to the offseason. We'll talk a little bit about some similarities the Magic and the Bucks have, where they didn't really make a ton of moves, but let's talk about the moves you did make. You had Taurean Prince, Gary Trent Jr., a guy that Magic fans kind of wanted to sign. Some did, at least. DeLon Wright, and then your draft picks, AJ Johnson coming from the league there in Australia, and Tyler Smith. Malik Beasley goes to Detroit. Magic fans know that Patrick Beverley ended up in Israel. I don't know if you know the beef that Magic fans have with Patrick Beverley. Are you aware of this at all, or should I share this with you?
Is this from Bucks days, or is this older? It must be older, right?
It's just his existence. So his podcast, it really is just last year. But I think it was last offseason. His podcast, he says a lot of outlandish things sometimes on that show, but he talked, it was right after ESPN had dropped their top 100 players, or whatever the list is that they do every offseason. And the Magic had 2 players in the top 50, Franz and Paolo, and he just ripped the Magic apart. Why? First off, saying Franz isn't top 50, and you could argue that, whatever, but saying they got 2 guys in the top 50 and they're not in the playoffs, he called them some names and stuff like that, whatever. And so for the fact that the Magic made the playoffs, overachieved by all standards, 47 wins, 5th seed, pushed Cleveland to 7 games. Patrick Beverley lost in 6 and ended up in Israel. Most Magic fans are really happy. But anyway,
I don't know how long he's going to be there either, based on some more things he's saying on the podcast. But I think Magic fans are gonna win that hatred from here on out. I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, and then the last departure, Ty Washington going to the Suns, and then a couple guys that are still unsigned. Thanasis, I don't know if he's coming back, but Jay Crowder and Danilo Gallinari unsigned as well.
Big story, actually. Thanasis tore his either ACL or Achilles in a workout soon after the year. And I assume this was reported because this is what's going to happen. But basically, since he's also a family member, the word is he can kind of just like rehab and be around. So I think if you're the one Magic fan who cares about Thanasis Antetokounmpo, I think you'll still see him. I think he's still going to be around the bench.
Good.
But he won't be able to actually play, unfortunately. Yeah.
That's the real reason we had you on this show.
Yeah, I know everyone's looking for the confirmation there. It's so funny that I'm like locked into this too. But it's like for everyone on the Bucks is like they love him, and I've now seen some. God, whose podcast was it? Like Paul George or DeMar and someone were like, actually, Thanasis is awesome. Like great energy for their team. Like he keeps everyone focused. I'm like, wow, you know what? I'm fine with it then. And now that it's not a roster spot, I'm even more fine with it. But anyway, sorry. You were talking about important basketball things,
That's right. No, he's important. No. But so let's talk about these additions really fast. Taurean Prince, Gary Trent Jr., we talked about your draft picks, AJ Johnson, Tyler Smith, a couple other guys that were signed. What are your initial thoughts about those guys coming in versus the departures that you had? Really your overall thoughts about the Bucks offseason.
Yeah, I thought they crushed it, which is funny because I was very uncertain after the draft. I think the book, without going too deep into him, and AJ Johnson has had like an intoxicating summer league and workout and Rico Hines run summer so far, like very fun, fluid ball handler, but he's super skinny. So it's kind of like a wait and see there. And Tyler Smith, big, super athletic, has a great looking shot, has no idea what to do on defense. So basically 2 guys who they're not going to play this year. And I remember saying, and we kind of panned the first round pick, Tyler Smith in the second felt like good value. So that it was one of those drafts, where it's like, I kind of wish they'd taken them in the opposite order, but they got the 2 guys. So it's probably fine. But I remember saying like, okay, they must know they've got some free agents coming, right? Or at least that they have a line on them. I'm not saying there was any tampering, of course, but they must have at least felt good about it because these guys are never going to play. And I think you only do this if you're like, no one we draft is going to play at 23 overall, which is I kind of hoped actually your guy Tristan da Silva was going to fall all the way down to the Bucks. I think that guy could play year one. I don't know if he will in a crowded Orlando team, but really, really love Tristan da Silva. Anyway, that's a different story. And then they go out. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, we are high on Tristan. I don't know if he'll play either, but I guess we'll wait and see.
I think he's ready to, man. I really think he's ready to. But again, a lot of young guys who feel ready to play on it, which is a fun problem to have. They signed DeLon Wright first. I'm like, okay, I hope he's not going to be the fifth starter, but that's a backup point guard who can also play with Dame. And I think that's the ideal, right? That's what you really want is he can spell Dame. He's a very efficient assist to turnover guy, can probably shoot. We'll see how it goes throughout the season, but a good defender, good at deflections, like very great player. Overtaxed as a starter, but would be a good bench player. Then they signed Prince. It's like, oh, this is great. On a vet min with no reason, totally will take that. He can start now, and they're a little bigger, and he's a good shooter and an overrated defender, not a great rebounder, but like a real NBA body, I think can probably bring you a little more than Beasley did on defense. And then it was Gary Trent Jr. That's like, okay, this is ridiculous. I remember saying after Prince, like if they also get Trent Jr., because Bucks fans were optimistic, I was like, I just think there's no way. There's got to be some money out there somewhere. Somehow there wasn't, or he turned down maybe a little bit more to come with the Bucks. And I think he's not the archetypal player we wanted. We were like, can we turn Markelle Fultz into Bruce Brown? That was the thing we talked about, like just have him defend and roll. And Rohan, I introduced this to Rohan. He got so excited about it. I'm like, Rohan, you should remember, we have no idea if he can do any of these things. We've never seen him do these things. This is all just like us spitballing. If he could do these things, he'd have a contract, I think, by now, unfortunately for him. But like just looking at defensive first players, because, that's what we thought the Bucks needed. But I think you just can't say no to Gary Trent Jr. on a vet minimum. Yeah. Like he's such a good player. I think he's a better offensive and defensive player than Beasley. And now your depth is better. They basically did 1-to-1 Trent for Beasley. They did Prince for Crowder and then DeLon Wright for Pat Bev, which actually each of those spots then they're getting younger and I think just straight up better in alongside some of the depth they have, some of their young players who came along last year. So I think they're actually in a really great position. I think their starting lineup is going to be kind of insane. I think there's going to be some more things to work through, but outside of Lopez, which I'm sure teams will continue trying to hide defenders on him when he's at the perimeter or just beg him to shoot, there's just nowhere you can stash players anymore on a Dame, Trent Jr., Middleton, Giannis, Lopez lineup. So I think they did an excellent job. I think it was kind of fortuitous the way all this second apron stuff stacked up and teams stopped wanting to spend as much because I think, this is like a ridiculous haul for 3 vet minimums. But I think, funny enough, Dame and Doc seem to be like their big recruiters. Doc joked on a Summer League broadcast about it. He just came from, I think it was Miami, talking to Gary Trent Jr. Like he was doing like a press run about it before it was even official. But yeah, I think their offseason was great. It was funny that, at first they kind of got panned for not doing as much. And I think by the end of it, I would say pretty excellent job given the resources that were available.
Yeah, I definitely think a lot of those guys will fit in no problem. Gary Trent Jr. is a no-brainer for me. Putting him alongside Dame in that backcourt, I think it's going to be great. So, like I mentioned earlier, Magic and Bucks, somewhat similar offseason in that their core stayed the same, right? A couple things switched around, no major moves, no major splashes. You touched on this earlier when we were talking about Doc and health and stuff. Pretty much a lot of continuity is going to be the conversation with the Bucks coming into this season. And that's probably going to be, worth it right there. The fact that, you're going to have these guys, Dame and Giannis, plus all the surrounding cast, Chris Middleton and others, have a whole summer together of continuity. I'm guessing that probably bodes well in a lot of minds of Bucks fans out there.
Yeah, I think it's for a different reason than Orlando, right? I think from the Magic perspective, I don't disagree. And I actually just heard the low post where they were kind of, I won't say bashing, but they were a little low. Like I think they should have done more. And I think fair. I like KCP quite a bit. I mean, if you can add a star, I like to do that generally. But also, you don't want to sell low on the wrong guy. I think that's a really bad feeling. And I have no idea. And you would know more than me, right? But whoever they're giving, they let Fultz go. I don't think that's really selling low. And I think, again, unfortunately for him, the market's kind of borne that out, right? But I don't want to trade away, certainly not Paolo or Franz, but even like some of these other guys and then a little more usage. And it's like one of these Mikal Bridges situations, right? I think everyone's a little afraid of that. And you'd rather just see, let's give these guys more runs, see what they can do, I think for the Bucks side, it was more, these guys just need to really learn how to play together. And I think the model that we've all talked about, and now actually there's two, is Minnesota and Dallas. Both of them go and add their kind of, in their cases, more controversial, I guess, figures in Kyrie and Rudy Gobert. And the first year's it's not great. They're kind of figuring it out. It never really clicks for a sustained period. And then both of those teams, once they hit their strides after some additional time, and I think the other part of it is just better pieces to place around them, which the Bucks certainly needed. They built everything around Drew and then swapped him out for the opposite kind of point guard. I think now the hope is the pieces fit a little better. You still don't have the great defenders, but they're better. And, okay, Dame and Giannis aren't coming into this fresh. And Dame's got his full offseason, which has been a huge thing for him. He's talked about I didn't get to work out full steam because you have to be able to pass a physical if you're going to get traded. And it took so long to get traded. My whole offseason was gone. This year, he's working out outside on IG Live and having his camps. And all the Bucks young guys are there. And I think there's a whole different energy and familiarity and continuity. And it's not about, is someone going to pop? I think their young players are, one or two will help them. I don't think there's going to be a star is blooming or anything like that. But I think now the pieces fit better and they know how to play together a little bit better. And Doc's been sending clips. Obviously, they had to also just change how they played for the third time in, however many months when they made 2 straight coaching changes. So yeah, I think the continuity was a big deal for the Bucks. And I think it was the right way to go versus, more huge trades and seismic shifts that you could end up easily in the same situation again.
Ty, looking ahead to this coming season, that's right around the corner, like we said, and I can't wait. I'm so excited.
Thank God.
Lots of moves happening in the the top half of the East there. We mentioned Philly and how no one's going to believe them until they actually do something. But, adding Paul George, obviously New York got a lot of the spotlight this summer, adding Mikal Bridges to the Nova Knicks, that whole thing. Boston's still there, obviously. Cavs pretty much stayed put. I'm not ready to put the Magic up in that section yet, but we stayed put, for whatever it's worth.
Yeah.
Where do you feel the Bucks fall into, the Eastern Conference when it comes to this season? Obviously, you mentioned you feel like they're right up there with the Celtics, but having another offseason, like you said, with Dame and with Giannis, having time to gel, having the same coach for a whole offseason, all those kinds of things. Do you still feel the same? Do you feel like the Bucks are right up there at the top of the East?
Yeah, I think Boston's geared to win more. We'll see at the injuries there, right? Porzingis banged up coming in. I'm still going to pencil in Boston for the 1 seed. I think they're just so they've made their team foolproof. If Derek White missed a month, Drew Holiday can do those things. Vice versa. The Jays, I think, kind of off of each other a little bit off of that. I think Porzingis is one of the bigger ones, but they've got really good backup bigs. I think not world beaters, but Horford, and they were able to keep some of those other minimum kind of guys as well. Hauser played really well in the playoffs. Pritchard somehow. So I'd say Celtics and then Bucks. I think the Bucks should be a 2 or 3 seed. And I think you look at last year, it was their disaster season, and it took till the last game of the season against the Orlando Magic for them to fall all the way down to 3, right? So I think their floor is still pretty high. And that's no Giannis for the last month, no Chris for about a month plus of the season, the kind of reduced version of Dame, which I think he should have a better season. So I think they should be contending for, 1, 2, 3 there. I don't know. Again, I think who do I trust in the playoffs is a different question than who do I think is going to win the most games, although maybe it's not even that far off. I think the Knicks I would have pretty darn high on both. They have their own injury concerns, but they're very deep now and very capable players. I think they're going to win a lot of games. The Cavs always seem to, even if they had a really weird season. I think you almost do put Orlando in that mix. I mean, you want to see it for more than 1 year, but defense is usually something that sustains. For me, I'm still a little leery about the offense. But if it's November and Paolo and Franz are both, or even maybe one, is that 38% from 3 and actually shooting them? I'm maybe I don't need to be worried about this anymore, and they're just going to win 50 games easily again. And I think Indiana is actually almost underrated at this point. I think they're a very good team as well. But for them, it's how real is this Nembhard thing? What is Mathurin going to look like back? So kind of some different questions there. But I think there's 6 or 7 really good teams, Miami, and then everything else. So it's a bit of a strange conference to me. But I would not say the Magic are if you're talking playoff equity, maybe. But in terms of regular season, I think they're going to be in the mix for home court for sure.
Yeah, that's what Magic fans are certainly hoping for. But yeah, none of us are crazy enough to think we're in the championship conversation like a Milwaukee or Boston or potentially New York and those kinds of things. But last question before I let you go, Ty. You've kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious, you being our voice of Bucks fans, what does the successful season look like for the Bucks? Is it a championship or bust season? And then ultimately, like what would be considered a failure for most Bucks fans? Kind of what's that range look like?
Yeah, I think no one feels great about it if they don't win it all. And I think the Dame introduction kind of spurred that. And I think he's got more than one good year left for sure. But, never know. Injuries and everything, knock on wood, right? You never fully know. But an older player and came here with a clear goal. And I think if you don't get one with Dame, that's going to feel like a failure of this like mini part of the Giannis era. I think they lose a great series to Boston or potentially in the finals. And I think that's like I'd say very reasonable outcome. And I think anything kind of below that, like losing to most other teams, maybe like a great New York run, but even still, I think most series losses outside of really Boston, who I think everyone looks at and goes, yeah, they're just a huge problem, man. Like credit to the Orlando, who's ready to kind of step up right after, because that's going to be a tough team to get through for everybody. I think pretty much any kind of non-champ, which is a hard bar. It's difficult, but I think that's how it should be when you've got an MVP candidate, perennially, and Giannis, one of the best two players in the league, Dame, Chris, all these other veterans and skilled players, the new guys. So yeah, I think I don't like the term championship or bust, but that kind of is where the Bucks are at. And I think that's a fair thing for it to be.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Well, Ty, thanks so much for hanging out with us here on like I said, the Magic side of the internet. Before I let you go, why don't you let everybody know who's listening and watching where they can find you and your Bucks coverage?
Yeah, you can find Gyro Step or Gyro Step Podcast Network. We have two Bucks shows combined into one. Wherever you're listening to or watching this fine podcast, and I hope you subscribe, rate, and review both of them. You can find me at Ti Windisch, and you can find all of our other Wisconsin sports content at gspn.info. So that's where we're at across the internet, on the non-Magic parts of the internet.
That's right. Love that. And hey, we are in the middle of football season, so if you want to follow some Packers stuff too, definitely go check out, all the different shows.
Who's not wanting to watch some Malik Willis on Sunday, baby? Right. Nothing hits like that. Oh, dear God.
I love that. That's amazing. Ty, thanks so much for hanging out with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Big thank you to Ty for hanging out with us today, chatting Milwaukee Bucks basketball. We've said it a million times on this show. There is no outlet out there that can cover the entire NBA thoroughly, right? ESPN tries whatever version of their coverage of the NBA is. You have other outlets that try. But no one knows the teams like the people that live, breathe, and sleep and die by their teams, right? That's why the Six Man Show exists. That's why the Gyro Step Podcast, Ty, that we just talked with, exists. That's why Nick's Film School exists, and Fear the Fro, the other teams that we've talked about here on our Eastern Conference preview series. We love this kind of content, right? And I love talking to Ty about the Bucks because, again, I had certain ideas about the Bucks last season and the drama that they had with Adrian Griffin and Doc Rivers and adding Damian Lillard to the mix and all that kind of stuff. But to hear Ty kind of talk about it from that first person perspective, that Milwaukee Bucks perspective, was really insightful and definitely gives you a little bit of an interesting look into what the season could be like for them coming up here. Like Ty talked about, having some continuity, having the same head coach over a whole offseason, a whole summer with Dame and Giannis together. Will that turn into playoff success? Obviously, time will tell, but definitely appreciate Ty for hanging out with us today. Guys, we're so close. Less than 2 weeks away from Media Day, from training camp is right around the corner. I'm super excited for it. Just want to let you know, obviously, like I talked about at the top of the show, just had this heart surgery on Wednesday. So I'm going to be out for probably 2 weeks or so from the show. And so Jonathan obviously will be hosting all these episodes, coming up over the next couple of weeks, getting you ready for some Orlando Magic basketball, which is right around the corner. So definitely keep tuning in, starting with Monday's episode. But until then, you all have been listening to The Six Man Show. We'll catch you next time. See ya.
Thanks for listening to The Sixth Man Show. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and Spotify to get new episodes downloaded directly to your phone. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to give us a 5-star rating and a review. It helps out the show a lot. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Sixth Man Show. We'll catch you guys next time. Go Magic!